Hi, I'm Eric Smallwood, a seasonal museum specialist here at the National Scouting Museum, and over the next 2 weeks, we are going to take a look at bugles and bugling in the BSA. This week, let's talk about the history of bugling in the Boy Scouts and its ties to Philmont Scout Ranch, particularly through Rayado. Every scout or former scout can verify hearing at least one bugle call while out camping with their troop or attending a local summer camp. Whether it is reveille, assembly, mess call, or retreat, the sound of the bugle has filled the air for over a century of the BSA history. Here at Philmont, the sound of a bugle can date back at least 85 years before Philmont was founded, as trumpeters of the 1st U.S. Dragoon Regiment, stationed at Rayado during the late 1840s and early 1850s, used bugles to signal their activities of the day to troopers stationed there. Lucian Maxwell's Rayado home was where 2 companies of the 1st U.S. Dragoons, predecessors to the U.S. Cavalry, were stationed in 1849 to use as a jumping-off point for patrols and as a resupply stop for troops in the northern New Mexico area. Each day, buglers would signal the passing of time by playing calls such as reveille, assembly, mess call, and retreat. Being a stationary post rather than on campaign, camp calls would have been much more regular. Assembly of the buglers would wake the men up in the morning about 15 minutes before reveille was played. Retreat would be heard while lowering the post colors, and tattoo would echo across the rolling hills and plains around Rayado to end each day. This would become a regular routine for the Dragoons at Rayado Post, and the bugle calls a second language to them. One of the most delightful memories of my own personal scouting experience is listening to retreat as the colors were retired and a relaxing evening with friends would begin. So how would retreat for an 1850 Dragoon sound as compared to a modern-day Boy Scout? Surprisingly, they would sound very similar. But don't take my word for it. Take a listen for yourself and see how they sound. Did you hear the differences? How about the similarities? To think that the rolling landscape of this part of New Mexico has heard those familiar notes for more than 150 years is inspiring. While retreat sounded the end of the day for soldiers and scouts alike, another more familiar bugle call would start each morning. Of course, I am talking about reveille. By the time of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. Army had consolidated all of the variety of bugle calls used by the U.S. infantry, cavalry, and artillery individually for 75 years prior into one set of calls for all branches. Some calls from each manual were selected for this new set, which would be used as the base for the first and only bugle call set used by all Boy Scouts just over a decade later. In fact, the only non-military bugle call used by the Boy Scouts is swimming call. In the case of reveille, the call for cavalry was far too long to be used in general service, taking over 2 minutes to play through from start to finish. The infantry reveille call, however, was much shorter and a lot easier to play and remember. So this became the classic tune we all recognize, whether a soldier or a scout. Though the troopers at Rayado would have not heard this call, it has been heard by countless scouts and scouters at Philmont for generations. Napoleon famously said that an army marches on its stomach, and many have argued that the 13th point of the Scout Law should be "a scout is hungry." Regardless, mess call has always been a very popular bugle call and tells soldiers and scouts alike that the food was ready and the dining hall was open for business. The mess call, played by bugling scouts, is the grandchild of breakfast call, known by the troopers stationed at Rayado. While written with slight variations, the two calls resemble a very similar rhythm and melody when being played. In the 1842 cavalry manual, there were two calls for meals, breakfast call and dinner call. Upon consolidating calls in the 1890s, cavalry breakfast call became the standard mess call for all troops on all branches, causing it to be the call carried over to the Boy Scouts just a decade later. The final call we are going to discuss today is assembly. In his book, Scouting for Boys, Baden-Powell included the music for the Scouts Call, with the caption, "For Scoutmaster to call together his troop by bugle." This illustration from the cover of an early BSA Music and Bugling Merit Badge pamphlet shows a Boy Scout bugler playing the Scouts Call. The Dragoons of Rayado were also called together by a similar sounding bugle call called assembly. As you will hear, the two sound very similar, nearly identical. The Dragoon Call is from the 1842 Cavalry Manual and would eventually become the General Service Assembly Call for all U.S. troops near the turn of the 20th century. This would then, in turn, be turned into the same call adopted by the BSA in 1911, when the Bugling Merit Badge became one of the original 57 badges offered to Scouts in the U.S. So now you have heard your way through bugling as it connects the U.S. Army Dragoons of the 1840s at Rayado and the modern-day Boy Scouts of Philmont. Next week, we will look at the Bugling Merit Badge, the troop bugler position, and the bugles found in the collection here at the National Scouting Museum. Did you notice anything unusual about the bugle I was playing today in the BSA segments? Join us next week to learn more about this very special bugle.